Today is May 3rd, 2024. Welcome to Native Calgarian. Oki, Naganago, Mekoche Chestakom Aki, Dekots Nagotine Siku. My name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use she, her, they, and them pronouns. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Great Bear Lake tribe in Treaty 11. My people wore rabbit skin, so it's been referred to the land of the hair people. I'm a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene Nation is uninvited to this area of Clincho Tiene Indahe in Satu Dene, meaning many big dog town, named after the Calgary Stampede. I was born in Calgary, or in Blackfoot Mulkinstis, as Michelle Elliott, an English name that has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. Acknowledging proximity to whiteness is important because the darker the skin, the more racism a person experiences. My mother is Northern Slavey Dene or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act and Post status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. Through my father, I am a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution, while having a Canadian Indian Act and Post status card, which is a colonial construct by Canadian policies meant to divide Indigenous peoples' inherent rights. Indigenous Two Spirit, or the Indigenous 2S LGBTQ community, and Indigenous women are at the bottom of the Canadian socio-economic ladder because of colonial trauma, imposed poverty, racism, gendered violence, and land theft. According to the 2023 Quality of Life report from the Calgary Foundation, 31% of racialized Calgarians cannot find suitable employment. I'm not a social worker nor an elder, nor do I speak on behalf of all Indigenous peoples, but I can share my journey as a Dene mother navigating this colonial, misogynistic, racist world in 2024. As a trauma informed Dene who has attempted to run and join many harmful colonial parties, spent money to be at expensive conventions, left my home to travel to those conventions just to vote on incomplete policies that still allow for incarceration, a denial of justice, a denial of health services, racism, colonial trauma, and genocide of Indigenous and Black peoples, I have worked to continue reports to advocate for and attempt to work within these systems meant to harm me and my community. I think of all of this today. I hope we honor the many Indigenous lives lost for the so-called country named Canada. I see your role in the importance of stopping harm, and as a citizen, see your role in reconciliation and as a treaty partner. Pride should never just be 1 month. It's important to understand that the straight agenda and gendered violence was and is forced on these lands by Christian outsiders. Land acknowledgements are critical for creating a safer space for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as the guest and acknowledging your role as a treaty partner in a so called time of reconciliation. Can they be performative? Of course. It's important land acknowledgements have meaning. I encourage everyone to introduce themselves with an acknowledgement of their ancestors, stories of displacement, or how you perceive your role as a treaty partner, as a citizen of Canada, refugee, or other land displacement, so we as Indigenous peoples know how safe you are to be around. If you won't pronounce your local Indigenous nations' names, you won't say your pronouns, won't say your story of origin, acknowledge stolen lands, acknowledge imposed economic oppression, or your role in reconciliation, I determine how safe you are to be around my community, my family, and definitely me, because we face colonial violence based on ignorance or worse, willful anti Indigenous biases. Understanding land acknowledgements and their importance is Indigenous 101 because it immediately addresses colonialism, oppression dynamics, broken treaties, and lies taught today in Canadian schools nationally. That's why settlers and those who call themselves Native Calgarians or whatever town you're from, you actually show me you have no Indigenous 101 understanding. Jesse Winty's book on Reconciled explains that perfectly, as do many Indigenous authored books. Land Back is a movement that could save the planet from climate change created by colonialism, but it would be a part of a treaty partnership, part of meaningful reconciliation, and honoring global initiatives like the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I'm speaking to you on the lens of the Nitstapi, which is the Blackfoot Confederacy. The Blackfoot south of the imposed US-Canadian border are the Blackfeet, or the Amska Bibi Gunny, and north of the border are the Siksika, Kainai, and Baguni of the Confederacy. These lands are Treaty 7, signed September 22nd, 1877, with signatures that include the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Goodstoney, formerly Wesley, Chiniki, and Bearspaw nations of the Stoney, or how they prefer that you call them, is the Yeeharhi nations. And I also want to acknowledge the Dene from Tsuut'ina Nation as part of the Treaty 7 signatories. I acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit status and non-status across Turtle Island as the keepers of these lands and the ones with inherent rights. All non-Indigenous people are treaty partners with the government signing on your behalf. You have a choice to decide whether you want to be a good treaty partner and honor the treaty, or if you want to be like the Canadian government and just keep breaking treaty. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you could pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. Thank you for listening, for watching, and if you can afford to give, thank you. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. You can also give me a review, whatever medium you're listening from, and I have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe. Go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. So today I'm really lucky to have the Indigenous Gathering Place come join me. How would you like to introduce yourself today?
Hi, Michelle.
Hi.
My name is Cheryl Ann Parskadden. Most people call me Sass. And I would say that I'm an exercise in duality is a positive way of saying, or I'm halfway to nowhere is the negative way of saying. So I am Cree, and my father was in the military. So I'm a member of the Métis Nation of Alberta. And my clan is Whitford Tuner Gladu. And I've been also gifted a name by Elder Clarence Wolflag Muxikum. And it is Waxisto Aki, which means courageous lady. And I'm very honored to have been gifted that name. And my family
Nice.
on my mother's side, Cree, my mother's mother died when she was 13. When my mother was 13. And the 8 children, 4 of the younger children went to live with their 4 older siblings. So my mother was raised from the time she was 13 by her older sister, which happens a lot in the Indigenous communities. As you know, a lot of lateral violence, a lot of direct violence, and also they were displaced and taken from their home. And because of that, the older siblings hid my mother and her younger siblings so that they weren't part of the residential school colonial system.
Yeah.
But they spent most of their life being what others called dirty little Indians. And so my mother's generation did their best to not be that and lost their identity, were not in their mother's arms, were in their older siblings being raised by really older teenagers. And so they lost a lot and they were hidden away from the colonial structures so that they weren't forced into residential school.
Mm.
So, a lot of trauma, as many of our listeners also have experienced, but I still hold on to a lot of hope. And when I was raised, I moved 19 times in 18 years myself. And so really didn't have a lot to hang on to as far as home and heart, and wasn't raised on reserve. So, and that was a result of, the colonial systems. So when I turned 50, I went back to school on purpose. And I was working in business. I did a lot of big jobs in corporations around Edmonton and Calgary. And I went back to school and took Indigenous Leadership Strategy and Governance at Banff Center,
Mm.
and was fortunate to graduate with a certification from there to focus my purpose and my passion and all of my learnings, my privileged learnings, into the Indigenous communities. And Elder Tom Cranebear from Banff Center was one of my teachers. And I was lucky to participate in constitutional rights by Jody Wilson-Raybould's sister and husband. So, speaking truth to power really matters. And I would call myself an in-betweener. having the privilege of learning how to operate in the business world and in the Western ways, but doing it for my peoples.
Yes. Beautiful. I love that. And I guess that's what brought you to the Indigenous gathering place.
Yes, I was really fortunate. I was asked to be a volunteer, and I willingly did so. My first volunteer activity was I stood in really hot weather at the Sunfest in Inglewood, talking to people about the Indigenous gathering place. And from that volunteer role, started to participate in fund development and raising money for the Indigenous gathering place. And then was asked to put my name forward to be on the board as the treasurer.
Mm.
And so I was the treasurer between October of 23 or 22 until August of 2023. And then I stepped off the board to take on the role as the general manager as our workload and efforts really hit what I call a hockey stick, where you go straight and straight and straight, and then there's the blade. That's what our activities have done at the Indigenous gathering place. So I took that role on willingly with my full spirit, heart, and soul.
Oh, wonderful. I think for me, so just to give you a little background on me, my granny went to Sacred Heart Indian Residential, is it Indian Residential School in Fort Providence, and I have an aunt and uncle that were forced to go as well, but they went in Yellowknife. There was two different places there, and there was the Anglican one that they went to. So she went to Catholic, they went to Anglican, and from that, I really understood my family so much better and understood where that trauma comes from. I didn't find until really the TRC we could really talk about those things. So for me, that was a real, like I knew something was wrong, but I didn't understand it. I didn't understand colonialism, didn't understand racism, and I didn't understand colonial violence and colonial trauma being a root of all of that. Like that wasn't a concept I understood at that time until we finally started talking about the TRC. But I would be like, look, there's graves. Like, why is everybody okay with this? Like, and so now here we're finally here where we can openly discuss and who we are, but better just reclaim who we are. So the concept of having like a place for Indigenous people, like to me, has been so critical. It is wild to me that we have like all sorts of different varieties of Christian church, Christianity, their churches, like whether it's Jehovah, whether it's Lutheran, whether it's Anglican, whether it's Catholic, and we don't have a single spot for Indigenous people.
Did you know that we have 500, there are over 500 places of ceremony in Calgary, and there is not one dedicated to Indigenous peoples that is accessible. Over 500.
Yeah,
As
no,
well,
that makes sense.
we are the only major city in Canada without an Indigenous gathering place.
Yeah, it is ridiculous. I cannot wrap my head around it, and I've never understood how our treaty partners have ever been okay with any of it. So, and I think I think of Sutina trying to do the good work of being more accessible for the Calgary urban natives, but I mean at the end of the day, you just don't have the rights to go trespassing on their lands, right? So I've always been excited and been following the work that you guys have been doing for years now. Would you like to discuss that at all, or?
Absolutely. So, a little bit about who we are. We are an independent, Indigenous led nonprofit organization. We were involved in the work that the city, the corporation, and the city at large were doing after the Truth and Reconciliation report came out for Canada. So the report was published, and many of our former members and our past chair, John Fisher, were involved in a now what strategy. Now, what are we going to do about these actions to make them active and to address them? And so that work they were involved in, and we formed a society in 2018 However, a keynote is we are guided by the wisdom of elders. We have over 60 elders that have been working with us directly over the past 10 years. So, although we became a society in 2018, the work began before that. And truthfully, there were two groups that came before us and weren't able to get it completed. So when we became a society with over 60 elders engaged, we've done over 46 engagements, workshops, surveys with the communities, the nations, the elders, and the citizens of Calgary to get input and feedback. And it has been a lot of work, and we've kept that information, and we are now using it today in what we're doing. So we are looking to build a culturally safe gathering place for Indigenous peoples in Calgary that honors the traditional lands of the Treaty 7 nations and the historic Northwest Métis, and fosters connections, healings, and cultural celebration. So I think some key words that I'd like to highlight is that it's in a location that is purpose built, culturally safe, that the Indigenous peoples and Calgarians and visitors will see as a beautiful, iconic location that has outdoor space, that also is built for our ceremonies, our protocols, and healing
Mm.
and teachings. So the elders have been at the table guiding this process the whole way. And there are so many reasons why we need an Indigenous led gathering place that Indigenous peoples can see themselves in, where they're not relegated to a small room that doesn't allow us to practice our smudge or our ceremonies, that is properly ventilated, that allows the teachings to continue from the elders to the youth and educates everyone so we can build a bridge of understanding.
Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot. So, now I was looking on your website and it looked like you had like a understanding already signed with the city about possibilities on location.
Yeah, so when we started the work, that led up to a notice of motion with City Council. And if you think it's challenging to get everybody to agree on anything, it is. However, that vote, that notice of motion that went to council had 100% support from every single councillor in the city of Calgary.
What year was that again?
That was in, yeah, you asked me good questions, 2021.
20. Okay, so
Yes,
not too old of
yes.
council.
And I may need to correct that, Michelle.
Sure,
So
sure,
we may have to cut that.
sure.
So the notice of motion went forward, and we had 100% support from the counselors. And the relationship was cemented through a memorandum of understanding with administration. And it was also cemented with a pipe ceremony. And the pipe ceremony went hand in hand with the memorandum of understanding so that we could walk in parallel ways.
Yes.
And we began the path of walking in parallel ways. And I like to use an analogy is if you have people walking in Indigenous ways with Indigenous worldviews, and you have a strand of hair, and you have people walking in the colonial Western way, and it's a separate strand of hair, you could argue that you're walking in parallel ways. But if
Mm,
anybody yanks on one strand of hair on the Indigenous side or one strand of hair on the colonial side, it can pull that out, and it can make the whole thing fall apart. What we're attempting to do is braid the Western way and braid the Indigenous ways. And when you have a braid like a braid of sweetgrass representing Mother Earth's hair, that braid is strong. So
Mm,
together we can be strong and we can build a bridge that goes in both directions. And that is truly what we're trying to do. And acknowledging and advocating and building a place of ceremony, healing, and teaching where people are comfortable. And we also have to bring the Western world along because we operate in this world today.
yeah.
And so it is a bringing together while honoring the legacy of our ancestors. And we
Mm,
can't lose sight of honoring the legacy of our ancestors. They truly are our filing cabinets of knowledge. And that knowledge is being passed on orally. And that needs to be recognized as well. How
hmm
we communicate and how history transforms over time is not just in the Western way. So we're looking at how do we braid the Western and colonial way and Indigenous worldviews.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, I love that. You see, for me, this is about treaty partnership, right? And respecting and understanding the treaty partners have had, thousands of years of wisdom here. And that just comes so clearly through in your words. And that, I just quickly looked this up while you were talking, and you were exactly right. On May 26, 2021, the Indigenous Gathering Place Society entered a memorandum of understanding with the city of Calgary. And this agreement was validated through pipe ceremony. And in February of 22, the city council voted unanimously for the notice of motion to dedicate the land in and around the confluence, which we know is formally known as Fort Calgary.
That is true.
Yeah. Um, so how does your partnership with Fort Calgary look like? Because
Well,
that's a mainly settler society or a board, right?
yeah, so we are not in a partnership with Fort Calgary.
Mm,
We have a memorandum of understanding with the support of the council, and we're working on looking at lands at traditional Mohkinstsis.
yeah.
So that is what our agreement is based on. Fort Calgary is the current occupant in a partnership with the city of Calgary today. They've gone through a rebranding, which would now refer to that location as the Confluence. And we commend the efforts at indigenization and a reflection of the stories of the past. Interestingly enough, the statement of significance for that parcel of land is held by the provincial government of Alberta. And the statement of significance only starts when the fort was built. So we have triggered a review of the statement of significance for that parcel of land that reflects the Indigenous history.
Mm,
So the rebranding by the fort and the indigenization, we need that everywhere.
yeah.
So it is separate from us. We would like to collaborate. We, live by our values of, love, respect, courage, wisdom, honesty, truth, and humility. And we always operate from a place of reciprocity.
Mm,
So, although the fort is going through an indigenization strategy, what hasn't fully been realized is the decolonization of systems. And so, decolonization is so critical to properly indigenize. And we're different than the fort. We're different because we are an Indigenous led board. We are guided by the elders and we are welcoming to all. So we've been engaging with the surrounding nations. We have elders from all over Canada that travel and live here. And we work closely with the city of Calgary to bring this vision to reality.
mhm,
So we have made significant efforts at Mohkinstsis. We've done drilling to make sure that it's not toxic. We've done drilling to ensure that the water levels are strong. It's outside of the floodplain. And we had four key tenets of what we wanted in an Indigenous gathering place. So we investigated 7 different locations with the city. We narrowed it down to 5. We did a thorough review. That 5 went down to 3. We brought those 3 locations to the elders, and the elders spoke that the traditional and culturally relevant location was at Mohkinstsis.
Mm.
And that is the traditional gathering place of Indigenous peoples. So the traditional Blackfoot territory was a place of welcoming for many different cultures, nations, and peoples. And, the history is that it was also fought over. And we can't have reconciliation without truth. So we do want to ensure that the truth is not lost in a rebranding of Fort Calgary, and that we bring that they stand in their truth, and that the Indigenous gathering place, we stand in our truth, and that there is space for both. We do different things.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we want the listeners and Calgarians and beyond to know, is that we are looking at a purpose-built location and place that is historically and traditionally relevant for ceremony, that feels safe, that addresses the complex feelings related to trauma and truth, that it's an ethical space where we welcome non-Indigenous people in to learn about the Indigenous history, to hear the stories of our elders, to practice and learn about our crafting and our art and our ceremonies. So the 4 tenets that we looked at in a location, and why Mohkinstsis was selected, was that we wanted an outdoor parcel of land to gather and to practice ceremony. It is where people gather to have powwows, to have gathering of Indigenous people. We wanted it to have access to a river, one of our most important medicines. We also wanted it to be accessible not just for our elders, but accessible so that people didn't have an economic barrier to get there. They could walk there, they could take public transit, they could ride their bike, so that it is accessible and we don't have economic barriers for people to gather.
Mm.
And so we looked at those core tenets and drilled down from there through the guidance of our elders to pick the location at Mohkinstsis.
Mm-hmm.
And that is mentioned in the notice of motion to investigate that particular land.
Hmm. Wow. So you have to make an agreement with the government of Alberta still, is that my understanding?
Well, the government of Alberta holds the statement of significance, and that land has 3 jurisdictions: municipal, provincial, and federal. And the reason that it is so precious is because of the history that is there. But we have to work with 3 levels of government to get the permits and the approvals required to put a building there.
Sure. When you say federal, is it because it was formerly RCMP territory, or is it the train that owns that land?
That's where it's interesting. That location was a former CP rail yard.
Mm-hmm.
It was a female jail. It was a lot of things. But most importantly, it was the traditional gathering place of Indigenous peoples.
Yeah.
Federal government has jurisdiction because of the waterway.
Ah,
And so we have been in contact with the province. We're working with them right now today. And we are also reaching out to the federal government to prepare them for what's about to come and to get their support to change the way information is shared and viewed in the systems of government. So
wow.
while we're doing this, we're actually breaking ground and changing the way that Indigenous projects are viewed. And it will make it easier for other Indigenous projects to carve a path through the municipal, provincial, and federal government. We want more gathering places. We don't want to be the only gathering place in Calgary. So it's a requirement, and it's also 3 times the effort
Wow.
to find new ways of doing things that support Indigenous peoples.
Wow. I really appreciate the work you're doing and to explain it in such a great way. So I appreciate all your time of really laying that out for us. Incredible that it has 3 jurisdictions there and 4, including obviously the Blackfoot Confederacy, like as the Indigenous rights
Yes,
holders. So
yes, yes, absolutely. And we've
yep.
engaged with the Blackfoot nations, and it's an ongoing effort to, maybe what is understood by our listeners, but may not be understood by the governments or Calgarians, is that we engage individually with each nation because each nation wants to be engaged in a different way.
Yeah.
So we have the surrounding nations that we respect. We respect that we're on traditional Blackfoot land. And we also had to shift gears when the Métis government changed into districts. And so we've engaged with the 2 new districts that are in Calgary. And it's not well understood that we are not Indigenous people, we are Indigenous peoples. And
Hmm.
it's not well understood that each nation has the right to engage with us how they want to.
Yep.
We don't prescribe. We don't say you get 2 representatives from each nation. That's not how we operate. So we look and value the rights and how they want to be engaged with, whether it is with chief and council, their you know their consultation offices, their members, their elders, whether it is one to many people in communication, or if it's a tea tour where we just go around and talk to people.
Mm.
And, that really matters to engage with people in the way that they want to be engaged with
Yes.
and ensure that it's not a performative measure. We are here to advocate, support, and to honor our ancestors and to create a space where that those teachings and those legacies can persist for time. And so this isn't a photo opportunity for us. This is not a picture and a check. This is meaningful work that will be transformative for all of the nations and Indigenous peoples that want to operate a facility in the city of Calgary, in the province of Alberta, in Canada.
I love it. I love your vision. I love what you're doing. And so I'm really honored to have you on my show today. Is there anything else that you'd like to really discuss today?
Well, I would say that we still need help.
Mm. Yeah.
And we want to call people in to this effort. And we don't really want to call people out that maybe don't understand.
Mm.
So, what we're looking for is ensuring that the nations, the elders, the Indigenous people have sovereignty over their narratives, that their narratives are not, um, taken by somebody else and told, that that is honored. And so, the help that we need is to become a member of the Indigenous gathering place. It's very expensive, it's free. You'll get our newsletter, you'll, be kept um, informed about what is happening, what stages we're at, and what we're doing. So that is at indigenousgatheringplace.com. And on the social media, if you're on social media, we're on all of them. IGP Calgary. You can look us up and again, stay informed. We are always looking for volunteers. We are always looking for advocacy and we're looking for a consistent and clear message. You've probably experienced, Michelle, having to do what I call myth busting, when myths get out there and maybe they're not well understood. So, clarity of our commitment to bring our vision to life, to be in the rightful location at Mohkinstsis, to ensure that we support the legacy of our elders and pass those teaching along. Time is running out.
Mm-hmm.
When we started this, we have lost a lot of elders
Mm-hmm.
since this work began.
Yeah.
And they want their teachings to be shared. So we need effort, we need helpers, we need money, we need the message to be strong and clear.
Yeah. And it needs to be Indigenous led, as you're doing. And it's
We
fantastic the work you're doing.
Yes, we
Yeah.
are Indigenous led, and that is a key differentiator from a lot of projects.
Mm-hmm. I agree. So, well, I really appreciate you coming on and discussing this with us, and I hope to have your team back on to discuss anything further at any time. Always welcome. And then, conversely, if you have other projects you want to talk about, you're welcome on for that too. Because at the end of the day, I love APTN and WindSpeaker, and those are really great mediums. But at the advantage of a podcast is you get to really tell your story. So you're always welcome back here as a person, as an organization, however you'd like to do that. And I so appreciate meeting you today and for having you tell your story here. So thank you so much for coming today.
You're welcome. And Michelle, thank you for being an amplifier, for being the voice, and for doing the hard work that you're doing. We need more people like you. And I just really appreciate that you're doing what you're doing. And I appreciate the listeners for, tuning in and taking action.
Yes. Thank you so much for coming on and saying those kind words too. To me, you and I grew up in a time where there was not much for media representation. And I cry when I think about, I want to say it's the 2016 Juno's opening, when I think about reservation dogs, and I think about all of the time we should have been included that we weren't. And so my kids, our kids, they get to be like, oh yeah, reservation dogs is on. No biggie. I'm like, you have no idea how lucky you are, a child. But the fact is, the posters are everywhere and they get to have representation. And that makes me happy.
Absolutely. We didn't grow up with snotty nose res kids and all
No.
of the movement, and I'm just so grateful that we are seeing the hard work of the people that came before us, and we can amplify that.
Yes, and create our own spaces and tell our stories our way instead of it being through that colonial lens. So honored to meet you, honored the work you're doing, and I hope that everyone honors your work by signing up on the
All right.
Indigenous gatheringplace.com. So thanks for coming today.
You're welcome. Thanks, Michelle.
Right on. And I invite you, I'm going to do my exit and give some resources. So you're more than welcome to stay on. But if you have to go, I'll understand too. So thank
Okay,
you.
I'm going to listen in.
Okay, great. I'm really proud that this podcast gives solutions in cultural safety training and cultural first aid and all of them to create a safer space for Indigenous, people of color, those with disabilities, and 2S LGBTQ to speak. According to the 2023 Quality of Life Report from the Calgary Foundation, 88% of racialized Calgarians feel uncomfortable and out of place because of their religion, ethnicity, skin color, culture, language, accent, gender, or sexual orientation, which was up from 75% in 2022. And I would think after everything we've seen about Palestine, the next year's quality report, that number is going to go from 75 to 88 to probably higher. So we should have a poll how high you think that's going to go for our next time. So our reconciliation action group has been doing some great work, especially with the city council outreach. I've been very proud of the social media that they've been putting out there, whether it's about the school resource officers being in schools. I'm just going to take a moment to plug Police Free Schools. They're a wonderful organization, and Moms Against Racism. another great organization. And right in this moment, we have call to action number 6, where it's Section 43 of the Canadian Constitution. There's a bill that's about to be passed. If you're not pressuring your MPs, please do, to pass this bill. It needs to get passed and out there ASAP, because our children should not be abused in schools, and we should be honoring the TRC call to action from our ancestors that asked for that to get done. So join the Reconciliation Action Group if you haven't already. And our book club coming up is doing things the right way, Dene Traditional Justice by Joan Ryan. I'm reading it right now, so it's been on my to-do list. I'm so excited to be going through it. That's on Monday. And I hope that, if you don't join my book club, you can always listen to those book clubs through my podcast, but you can also start your own, maybe in your organization. Really important work to do as Canadians not given proper truths through our education system. It is May 3rd. So today we're going to be doing some of the prep work for the May 5th Red Dress events, wherever you're listening from. I'd love to hear about the events that you attended for Red Dress Day and how you felt that they helped heal or helped you understand a little better about the issue and topic of missing and murdered Indigenous exploited people in Canada. And it was started actually in Winnipeg by a Cree artist. So please learn more about Red Dress Day, and please attend our events that we're having nationally. The one here in Calgary is going to be at the Field of Crosses at noon on Sunday, and I've been promoting that through our social medias. So really important for folks to participate in the so-called time of reconciliation. 84% of racialized Calgarians believe racism exists, whereas only 66% of non-racialized Calgarians believe in racism. I want to say thank you to Cheryl Ward, Chelsea Branch, and Alicia Fritkin of heretohelp.bc.ca. They have a wonderful section on Indigenous peoples and what is cultural safety and why I should care about it. Please use those cultural action tools in your day-to-day. Support Indigenous work like that as part of your reconciliation and settler understanding. I'm just lucky to highlight and repeat it here. Internalized racism and lateral violence is another form of violence Indigenous and equity deserving groups face by the structure of racism imposed on these lands. You can go to racialequitytools.org. Donna Bevins put this wonderful webpage together. She has resource files, and she has a great section on what is internalized racism. I also encourage people to donate if you can. The do's and don'ts for bystander intervention by American Friends Service Committee. So if you go to afsc.org, they have great information on what to do if you see a Muslim being harassed for their head covering, or vice versa. If you see an Indigenous person trying to speak and you have settlers over speaking over them, or you have a straight cis speaking over a 2S LGBTQ member, you can see the oppression dynamics. These are important things to understand of how to intervene in order to keep places safe for people. I wish that anyone who follows me on my social media would watch anti-racism organizational lead for the city of Calgary. He gave a presentation to their internal committee about the journey of becoming an anti-racism leader. You can find that on YouTube and on my social media. Black Lives Matter activists locally here in Calgary, Taylor McNally and Adora Nufor, have been targeted legally by the justice system. And you can go to Stop the Stack YYC to learn more about how to help our Black peoples within the city that rightfully deserve our protection and help, as they are being misused by the justice system. Indigenous have been talking about our issues, sharing our trauma in reports, commissions, and public hearings, just so it can be regularly disregarded. No more. Honor those words, honor the treaties, honor our ancestors' stories. Listen to politicians and the platforms and policies if they don't recognize equity-seeking groups in their budget with Gender Equity Plus, if they're cutting violence prevention programs and services, Indigenous education, housing, uterus health choices, gay-straight alliances, lack of human rights for migrants, immigrants, folks with disabilities. Know that your vote to that person or party directly negatively impacts equity-deserving groups. Demand that they implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action, the recommendations of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, the multiple reports about child welfare reform, violence prevention. And now we have 231 calls to justice from the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two Spirit on Red Shirt Day or Red Dress Day. The most important thing you can advocate for are those 231 calls to justice. They're for every single Canadian. They're for every single order of government. They're for every part of this world, business as well. Provincially, we also have the 113 pathways to justice. So all you blue voters can hold your blue MLAs to account on it. There has been a new Premier's Council on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, but I have yet to hear them even meet. Municipally, of course, we have the White Goose Flying Report, which the Indigenous gathering place on their website, it's deeply rooted within. Denying these reports is a form of abuse called gaslighting. Our people are experiencing extreme racism in every institution, from justice to education to health, with multiple reports that say the same thing. In fact, as you all know, I really promote the First Nation Information Governance Center, the OCAP principles of ownership, possession, control, and access to data. And that organization put out yet another article about racism in our emergency places that we go to, the ER rooms, and how many Indigenous people are turned away. This has happened to my own brother, and now we have the data to prove yet again. So demand change from election platforms and politicians. If they don't understand colonialism, racism, privilege, sexism, they literally have zero business running. This should be understood by everyone, including politicians, community organizations, sports clubs, churches. Google articles on how non-Indigenous Canadians can become allies, because now there are multiples of them. And the Calgary Foundation has a great ally toolkit that you can go and access if you don't know how to get started. Stephanie Harp and I have talked in the past about trying to reach out to our allies and talk about the housing crisis that we're facing. We also encourage people to sign up to the aboriginalalert.ca, as well as the Missing Children of Society apps, in order to learn about missing people in our worlds. I really thought the womenshomelessness.ca had a great statement about urgent action to protect the lives of Indigenous women, girls, two-spirit, and gender-diverse people experiencing homelessness. Just a little update about the work we've been doing with the Reconciliation Action Group. As many of you know, I had a high school friend stay on my couch for a whole month. His entire family's been houseless now for an entire year, staying in a hotel. So the Reconciliation Action Group had a small fundraiser, and we were able to get my friend housed. But another friend of mine who's doing some great work in some of these organizations that we're talking about is trying to get the mother and the kids housed. So it has been very difficult, and this is just my life. I can't imagine what it's like for other people trying to help, our Indigenous peoples get housing. Another issue that we're facing right now is the drug crisis, the drug poisoning crisis, because our governments refuse to give us safe supply, and the numbers out for Alberta are atrocious. So if you do know someone who's using substances, please do not use alone. If you are using alone, you can contact the National Overdose Response Service at 1-888-688-NORS, or Brave and Doors and Lifeguard apps can be downloaded in order to help create a safety plan in case you are using alone. I strongly support Freedom's Path Recovery Society.ca. If you want to donate there, they are free, give one-on-one addiction counseling services, group treatment for recovery here in Calgary, are queer-friendly and anti-racist. And as many of you have heard, I've been fully supporting Canada's first 2S LGBTQ Addiction Recovery Center, stonewallrecovery.ca, in order to help. A lot of our homeless population are under that umbrella because, well-meaning Christians kick all their kids out. So it's very difficult. If you're experiencing emotional distress after anything I talked about today and need to talk, you can call the First Nation and Inuit Help for Wellness helpline at 1-855-1 855-242-3310. You can go to hopeforwellness.ca if you prefer. They have a text box because it is Red Dress Day coming up for more related to missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit. You can also call 844-413-6649. There is a 60 Scoop Society of Alberta. It's not really a crisis line, but you can sign up at ssisa.ca. The Indian Residential School Survivor Family Hotline is 866-925-4419. Kids Help Phone is 1-800-668-6868. They also have a text option for all you texters, 686868. And they have a live chat from 7 p.m. till midnight in Eastern time. So we're a mountain time, so we'll have to convert that. The Native Youth Crisis Hotline, 1-877-209-1266. So the LGBTQ youth line no longer exists to call, but you can text at 647 694 4275. You can also go to youthline.ca for that is more for non-Indigenous. For folks, there's also a distress center lines in your area, usually a functioning 211, but the new national number is 988, and you can also text at 988, or you can go to 988.ca. The following are 2S LGBTQ crisis supports available in most areas. Unfortunately, only Toronto has this, but I wanted to highlight this Indigenous-led crisis response pilot that's being led by the Two-Spirit people of the First Nations in partnership with two other organizations. So it's only located in Division 14. So if you're there, you can just call 211. But to find out more, you can go to twоспirits.org to learn more. I wanted to give an American line for my Two-Spirit friends. You can go to strongheartshelpline.org, and these numbers will only work in the States for my American listeners, 844-7-NATIVE or 844-762-8433. For our Canadian folks here, itgetsbettercanada.org has tons of resources for 2S LGBTQ. Just a warning for the QT BIPOC. I've seen some of the organizations in Alberta listed, and not all of them practice anti-racism or have Indigenous education. So I would also encourage the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls Two-Spirit line for more culturally sensitive information, along with Hope for Wellness. Violence is my everyday reality. Every Indigenous generation has faced it. This is self-care, how I take my power back. This is why I started this podcast, to speak freely without interruption, tone police, leadership shaming, gaslighting questions, as many people don't want to hear our opinions. Sure like to tell us theirs, even though if they know nothing about us. Colonialism, the constant surveillance that we are under, from just existing to our protests, to the vigils, to our rights. I and many others share info on microaggressions daily, so it's just unacceptable anymore. Learn about being trauma informed. Folks like me are dealing with so much trauma, internalized racism, gatekeeping, people that survive off the status quo, and then they're just folks really deep in their trauma. Internal and external racism is an everyday reality for me, Indigenous peoples, folks with disabilities, QT BIPOC, and more. I want to say Masi Cho to my ancestors, to my granny and my mom for what strength looks like through your example. I want to say thank you to my father for teaching me to be strong and blunt, my stepmom for teaching me what a proud culture is, through her Austrian family and roots, teaching me to be a proud Calgarian, whatever that means. It's through her I'm a second generation proud Calgarian. And thank you to my husband, our producer, Darcy, for producing, editing the show, being my husband, childhood friend, father of our child, support down my journey of this red road. He has witnessed decades of sexism and racism that I've had to experience, as well as his own family. To our child, we are blessed that you chose us, and we learn from you every single day. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. I hope my family will be proud in the future of us trying to discuss these present day issues. I honor the Blackfoot as the elders and members have been so kind to me on my Red Road journey. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Blackfoot, and Leonard Kenny taught me how to pronounce it in Sahtu Dene. My humblest apologies to the Blackfoot and Dene elders and language keepers as I try to learn proper pronunciation. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening and watching and can afford to give, thank you. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or your questions. I also have a YouTube channel if you would prefer to subscribe and watch, and you can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. Second last thing I want to do is a touch grass moment, because there are a lot of dark things I talk about. And obviously, with a war going on in Palestine, we see a lot of stuff on media and social media. So, touching grass is an expression to reconnect to the world and not focus so much on the screens. And I'd love to hear about yours. But I wanted to tell you about a fun story out of Drumheller. There was a Guinness Book, a world record of all of these people who dressed up in these dinosaurs costumes. They asked for 250 and they ended up with 3,000 people. So for folks, I reshared it, and I couldn't believe how many people went to go break a Guinness Book of World Records, but it's the funniest thing to see. So I hope you caught that on my social media. But I do want to end by giving side eye to those Calgary rabbits. You're lucky I'm not tradish. And my beautiful cousin would respond, or you'd be in my dish. Thank you, folks, for listening.